Hey, welcome to the Mile High Speed RC Garage, everyone. Today we've got a video that has been 3 years in the making. I've been running RC cars on and off since 1985, so I'm pretty attuned to the fact that RC cars end up costing you way more than the upfront purchase price that you pay for them. But I've never actually tried to quantify that cost differential, until now. 3 years ago, I set out on this mission to quantify that differential and escalation and try to answer the age-old question, what is the true cost of owning RC cars? I did so by tracking all the money I spent on 6 different RC cars over the course of 3 years and comparing that to what I spent just for the purchase price of those cars alone. And by tracking costs, I mean every cost. I logged every screw, every bit of lube, grease, replacement part, tool, hop-up, drop of diff fluid. I mean everything, no matter how big or small. I logged it all in a spreadsheet. However, once I had that database, I found that I wanted to try and understand how I was spending on RC cars in all sorts of different ways. Not just how much I spent on absolutely everything RC related versus my cumulative purchase price of those cars, which is what primarily I set out to do. So a second major category of data I then wanted to know was, what is the increase above the purchase price to actually get these cars running? Because we all know, even the term ready to run doesn't really mean ready to run in this hobby. Typically you need things like a LiPo battery, a charger, a transmitter, at the very least, and in some cases much more. The third category, now that we were up and running, that I wanted to see was, what is the cost of replacement parts added in to keep it running? Because anyone who's done this hobby for any amount of time knows that after a couple of packs, you're going to be breaking parts and buying new ones. Now this might be where a lot of people would stop and end the analysis and say this is the best representation and escalation of owning RC cars. The purchase price plus things needed to get running plus the replacement parts. But I wanted to go further into some more difficult and subjective categories. So category 4. What is the cost when adding in maintenance items? Because again, even if you manage not to break something, won't belong before your truck needs some maintenance. So things like grease, shock oil, diff fluid, but I also wanted to put in tools that were necessary to perform that maintenance. Lastly, what do costs grow to when hopping it up and having more fun with it? Certainly this is a luxury cost and not necessary, but one I wanted to track for each car nonetheless, because hopping up your rig is a big part of enjoying this hobby. Now in doing so, one more challenge revealed itself here. Shared costs. In these categories, I found that I was sharing the purchase price of some of these items across multiple cars, and in some cases, just some cars in particular. Take the LiPo charger, for example, that you need to get running. If you buy just one car, it's straightforward. You'll need to buy that charger and get up and running, and so you'll add it to the cost of your purchase price of that one car. But the second car you buy can use that same charger, so you don't need another. So now you can split that cost between 2 cars. Buy 5 cars and now your charger can be split 5 ways and the cost to get running goes down significantly for each. So as you can see, clearly when just tracking how much does each car escalate in cost above the purchase price, there's a huge efficiency to buying multiple cars and sharing costs between them. Because of that, I split each category 2 ways. First, what it would cost each car if it were the only car you owned and you had to absorb every one of the costs under that one car. And then the second, what is it when you own multiple cars and you can share across platforms? Clearly there's a huge difference. So see, I told you this got a little more tricky than normally thought. So enough of the blather, enough of the rules, let's get into it. Let's meet our test subjects and let's take a look at how the purchase price of each of these began to snowball. The 6 cars we used were the Exceed Sunrise, the Kyosho Optima re-release, the Arrma Typhon BLX, Associated Rival MT10, Losi Tenacity DB Desert Buggy, and the Arrma Kraton EXB. As you can see, they're mostly our Bashel type cars. We spread things between 2S all the way up to 6S. We covered entry level to high advanced, and we hit 5 major different brands. So we did a 2.5-minute review and cost analysis on all these vehicles. At 6 vehicles, that's a pretty good chunk of time. So use these timestamps to navigate to the content that suits you best. Select a particular car, or you can just jump to the end and see our conclusions on what we feel the true costs of owning RC cars is. So with that, let's jump right in. So starting at the low end, we have the Exceed Sunrise. By far the cheapest car of the bunch for the advertised cost, completely ready to go out of the box. Came with a battery, charger, electronics, even double A's for the transmitter. Really fun car to get started in. Rips around, especially if you upgrade the electronics a little bit. Brakes very easy, but parts are also pretty cheap. I had a lot of fun with this car trying to reach 90 miles an hour with it, with all kinds of upgrades. We never made it. I think we only got to 82, but it was a lot of fun. We did one time lose control of this car at around 50 miles an hour, 60 miles an hour, I think it was, and we hit a concrete curb. That was spectacular. We didn't recover much of the car. It absolutely exploded. And boy, what I wouldn't give to have some video. Either way, how much does this car really cost you? Well, this car started cheap and cost nothing extra to actually get running. As noted, open the box and go. So it won that category of cost to get running, as it's the same as just buying a car. Zero. It's up 0%. Cost with parts, well, the parts do break easy, and it goes through a lot of parts. Now, granted, they're cheap, and of course, I also did it no favors pushing it to the limits like we did. In this category, for parts, the car jumps from purchase price now up 96%, so almost double. Again, this might be the category you would use to determine the increase, and stop here, as the next categories have, involving tools and maintenance and hop-ups and shared costs, maybe a little too subjective for some. But with costs for maintenance and tools added in, the price of this car escalated quickly all the way up to 335% of cost purchase price. So wow, things went up a lot here. Here we get to see the importance of those shared costs, because this category, maintenance and tools, only jumps it to 136% if you can share those costs across these other vehicles. So same would be of the last category where we have hop-ups. On its own, this pushed the car now up to a stratospheric up 513% of the purchase price. Now, while sharing those costs across the other vehicles, up 195%. So, almost 3 times. That's still a lot. But again, this car was disadvantaged with a real low purchase price, and, trying to push it up to 90 miles an hour and things really didn't help. So in the end, it was the cheapest to get going, but it was the most expensive increase across, well, not the most expensive, but the biggest increase in cost over the base purchase price in the long run. A lot of that has to do with a beginner car and the cheapness that it started out as. Next, we'll do the associated rival MT10, one of my favorite all-time vehicles. Most will tell you this car is indestructible. That's what you'll see. And if you watch videos online, it's hard to argue with that, with the abuse this thing takes. But it comes with a caveat, though. Not when it's cold. This car, especially the plastics on it, will suffer in the cold, and whatever Associated's plastic compound is, it becomes almost like glass below 50, 45 degrees or so. I bought this in the wintertime and broke just about every plastic part on it, and I thought, what in the heck are these videos showing this car taking that kind of abuse? And my Arrmas and my Losis are taking this, and this thing couldn't take anything. And I almost gave up on it. But summer came, temperatures went up, and sure enough, this thing it actually takes effort to break this thing. You actually have to try and figure out how to break this thing during the summer. You can just beat it to death. It's a blast to drive, it's relatively cheap. You can do double backflips, front flips, wheelies. This car has great aerial control, and it is just a fun car to drive. Its cost, well, again, this version out of the box to get running is pretty good. It comes with all electronics, a battery, a charger. You just need the AA. So it did really good in this category, but I bought a brushed version. And, so that's only true if you can live with those brushed electronics. They lasted about 3 minutes from box to me pulling them, opening the box to me pulling them out of the car and replacing them. I never actually bought this intending to use those brushed electronics. I would replace them almost immediately with the Arrma BLX system. It worked really good. So, out of the box, it does good if you can live with the brush. There is a brushless version out there that you could buy to kind of keep that down. So, right out of the gate, this thing's up really small, just a small 8% out of the box. So that's pretty good. Now, parts, well, like I said, this jumped up in this category because, my first winter learning curve with this car, I was going through plastics pretty good. But since then, it's dropped because it is really durable. That pushes the car up 51% when you add in the parts. That's pretty good, considering that's the category most people would stop. Price, original price, plus stuff needed to get it to run, plus parts only being up 50% is not bad. Maintenance, you throw on some maintenance, we're up 171%. For this as a standalone car, 72% over base cost when you share that over vehicles. Still doing well. And then upgrades. Took a hit here on the standalone because you need those electronics to begin with. But shared it wasn't too bad because I already had them, that Arrma BLX system. So overall, this rig for me went up 229% as a standalone car, 91% if you share things across vehicles. That's really great for the fun you can get out of a great car like this. Okay, next up we got the Kyosho Optima. Now this car was my dream car. It's what got me started into this hobby in the 80s. I had a Turbo Optima Mid SE as a kid. That's that vehicle over there. That's the original. Got a cool video link up here of me unboxing that thing after about 25, 30 years of it sitting in the basement trying to get it running. But this one as a kid was the one for me, and I never owned this car. This is actually the re-release. Right out of the gate, this fella takes a jump and goes up pretty high because it doesn't come with anything you need to get it running. No motor, ESC, battery, transmitter, nothing. So boom, it goes up 103% just to get the thing running on its own. 48% if you're able to share those items across other vehicles. So parts, well, I don't treat this thing as bad as I do the other cars. It's more of a track car, and I mostly just race it. It's not a basher, and that saves it from a lot of the abuse that some of these other vehicles are taking. So we didn't break very much. So for parts, there's just a tiny tick up here for running it in the parts category. Car ends up at 103% up over cost on its own, 48% if you share it. Adding the maintenance in, tools, etc., we're up to 211% standalone, 66% shared. And upgrades, well, there wasn't much in the way of upgrades with this guy. We added some pinions for race gearing, etc., which, again, we're able to share some of those costs as long as the pitch and modulus match other vehicles. We've got a good video on gearing, everything you know about gearing up above here, if the terms pitch and modulus confuse you a little bit. There wasn't any hop-ups either. So where we end with this car is finishing standalone 216% up over base cost and 67% as a shared cost over the vehicles. All right, next up, the Arrma Typhon. A good entry-level basher, or maybe even a mid-level basher, really. Did everything with this car, from pushing it up over 100 miles an hour by building a custom spool for it. Video link up there if you want to try and build a custom spool for this car. We can show you how. To flying this thing like an airplane. I mean, this thing really does jump well and flies pretty good. We wrecked it at over 70 miles an hour on street asphalt by hitting a manhole. We dropped it on its tail from about 25 feet up in the air. Broke it apart. That was some bad air control on my part. We hopped it up like crazy. Ran it on 4S as a fast street car. It's a very versatile vehicle. Out of the box to get it running, your advertised cost will jump like to 59% on its own. Just 17% if you can share some of that, because you'll need batteries, charger, and some AA's to get it up and running. Add in broken parts, jumps up to 118% increase over base here on its own, 76% shared. But again, we'll cut him some slack because of how badly we abuse this thing. Throw some maintenance in and we go up to 222% on its own, 93% shared, and finally hopping it up, mostly because of that sort of 4S stuff that we were doing and kind of the street racer run. It goes up to finish with an overall base price up 312% if it were your only car, and 123% when it's shared cost. So good little vehicle. Does climb. It's so versatile it actually leads to it being a little more expensive and climbing up in the cost range. All right, our next contestant, the Losi Tenacity DB Desert Buggy. Excellent car, great quality build. Probably one of the best builds we have. Not quite a basher, although I kind of treat it more that way. Definitely not a racer, so I guess it is what it is. It's a desert buggy. I enjoy this car more as a 4S vehicle. I put a 3670 motor in it, 130 amp ESC. The 4S pack is pretty heavy and does stress things a bit weight-wise, so a little lower milliamp pack makes sense here if you do that, something like a 3000 milliamp just to keep the weight down. To get going with this car, it's similar to the Typhon. You're going to need some batteries, a charger, some AA's for your transmitter, so you'll see a jump right out of the gate, 37% up with this car on its own, 6% if you can share a lot of that stuff across vehicles. So that's pretty good, not much to get it up and running. Parts. Well, this thing has been awesome, even though I drive it a little tougher than it's probably even envisioned. Use it more of a basher, especially in the air. I do a lot of jumping with it. I also run it on 4S, so parts very minimally jump the car up to 59% on its own, 28% if you're going to share those. Then we got the, throw a little maintenance number on there. The car jumps up, you're up, over base cost of 137% at this point, if it's the only vehicle you own, and 41% if you can share it. And finally, any hop-ups. Didn't do a lot of hop-ups to this, although we did that 4S electronic system. So overall, the car finishes up 175% over its original purchase price on its own, or just 54% if you can share a bunch of those costs across vehicles like I could. So actually, this car probably does the best out of all of them in terms of controlling your costs and keeping the vehicle fairly close within the purchase price. Finally, the Kraton EXB. Now, this thing is a beast. I love this car. But these are really pushing the limits of what you would ever call a toy. These things can be downright dangerous with their power, their size, their speed. You know, this thing runs up about 12 pounds fully loaded, so picture a bowling ball whistling along at about 80 miles an hour, and you get an idea of what these things could do if you lose control of them. But dang, are these fun. You can bash this thing till the cows come home. It takes a massive beating. You know, you can do crazy things in the air. Front flips, back flips, doubles, standing flips. It's just a fun car to drive. I got a great deal on this car, so a little Black Friday deal, so it skews the numbers a little bit for me. The car comes as a roller, so right out of the gate, you're going to need a full suite of electronics, batteries, 6S in this case, so you're kind of doubling up on some stuff, transmitter, motor. So it goes up pretty quick. We're up 150% over base cost just to get this thing running. If it's your only car, 108% shared cost. You don't get as good a break with this car, at least I didn't, because I don't own a lot of any other 6S vehicles to share that with. And the electronics for this just don't fit in any other vehicle. They're just too big and too powerful. So next up with this car, we had the parts. Well, parts are pretty expensive on these, and just because of how big and powerful the cars are, you'll break stuff even though it's really, really tough vehicle. So we jumped up to 201% here now on its own, and 160% shared costs in this category. Add in some maintenance, and the car's up now 302% over your base price, and 177 over the shared costs. And finally, hop-ups. Well, I actually took it easy on the hop-up department. You can go crazy with these things and get some cool stuff from M2C and others and build it into something just short of a military tank, really. But for me, it comes pretty great out of the box, and I didn't do a heck of a lot with it. There is one hop-up that I do recommend, from shout out here to 3D RC. They make a great wing mount for this thing. We've got a little video on that you can go see. But we put that hop-up and just some others. Didn't really push the limits too much, so overall the car's finishing 310% above purchase price if it's the only car you own, and 184 if you can share those costs. Now, again, I couldn't share as many because I only have the one 6S vehicle. Okay, let's try and tie a bow on all this. What have we concluded is the true cost of owning an RC car? Well, let's look at a few ways. First, the analysis we originally set out to do, adding up all the money I spent on anything RC related for these 6 vehicles over 3 years and comparing that to what I paid for the cars up front, resulted in 147% uptick. Let's just call it 150%. Now that's the increase above the purchase price of the car. So what we're saying is that there's a 150% increase above base price, or 2.5 times the original cost of the car. So if you have a $200 vehicle, that car would essentially cost you $500 over 3 years by this analysis. However, as we noted, this is a little bit conservative because in this scenario, I was able to share all the costs across these 6 vehicles. If we look at cars independently and try and focus into what things would look like for a single car ownership, where that single car has to take on the burden of all the support purchases, such as batteries, chargers, tools, maintenance, things are looking a little more grim. Now we're looking at an average cost increase across these 6 vehicles, taking out the highest and the lowest extremes of an eye-watering 267% increase above purchase price. That's 3.67 times your original purchase price. So that's suggesting that that $200 car now costs $734 over 3 years on average. Ouch. Now this assumes a lot of variables that may not apply to everyone. Given the category of tools and maintenance and hop-ups were very similar in added cost, each category adding on average about 22% if it's a shared across vehicles and 70% on an individual car, these variables had a large impact. So it might make more sense to some to take those items out of the analysis and look at it only the category of purchase price plus the cost needed to run plus the parts. To some, this is a more realistic and balanced analysis. If you do this, I was showing an increase of 105%, roughly double, as an individual car, and 77% if you can share costs across multiple vehicles. So you can really see the impact of hop-ups and maintenance, which luckily are categories you can try to control to keep things a little more in check. Another category I found of interest to analyze was the average across these vehicles just to get them up and running. Here, the average was 60% increase over the purchase price as an individual car, and 31% if you can share those costs across all the vehicles. So unless you buy a real beginner setup that is actually ready to run as opposed to what the industry calls ready to run, you should expect this level of increase above purchase price right out of the gate. That's something folks entering the hobby for the first time may not be prepared for. Another category I found interesting was that the average replacement part cost across all these vehicles was 42% above the purchase price. So that frustrated feeling we all have when we're purchasing parts and complaining that we're spending more on parts than we did the car up front, for me, proved not to be even halfway true. And that's with me bashing these things pretty rough. In fact, the hop-ups, which I voluntarily chose to purchase and add to my cost, came to over 63% above the base price. A lot more than the parts. So this just proves that money spent on things you want to spend it on just flows from your wallet much more freely than spending on things you don't. So there you have it, folks. This was my best shot at quantifying the true cost of owning RC vehicles. These were my experiences, which are clearly going to be different for each user, and thus there's a lot of variability in all this. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope it doesn't scare you away from enjoying this hobby, because despite this analysis, you actually do get a lot of bang for your buck. For my money, I got 3 years of solid fun with these vehicles, and I consider it money well spent.